5 minutes for each applicant or representative speaker. But in no event should the cumulative presentation total by applicants or their representatives exceed 15 minutes. Proponents or persons in favor of the proposal will speak next and be allowed 3 minutes per speaker. Opponents or persons in opposition of the proposal will speak next and be allowed 3 minutes per speaker. The applicant or representative will be allowed a rebuttal. The rebuttal should be limited to a cumulative maximum of 5 minutes. For an exceptional case, the time limitations may be extended by the presiding officer with the approval of the board. As the board deems necessary, the case may be acted upon at this meeting or deferred for additional information or review. If the case is deferred, it will be acted upon at a subsequent meeting as provided by law. All proper parliamentary procedures shall be followed, including recognition of speakers, relevance of argument, and absolute prohibition of applause or demonstration. Standard of review. The Board of Zoning Adjustments has the power to hear and decide appeals where it is alleged that there is an error in any order, requirement, decision, or determination made by an administrative officer in the enforcement of the comprehensive zoning ordinance. The board also has the power to hear and determine appeals from applicants who have been refused a building permit because of a violation or conflict with the zoning ordinance or the official map of the city. The applicant's appeal to the Board of Zoning Adjustments is governed by Section 5-408 of the City of New Orleans Home Rule Charter.
Thank you very much. We will now begin with the unfinished business for appeals. Our next item is item number 13, BZA docket 5918, for a property located at 720 through 30 Bienville Street. This is an appeal of a decision of the Director of Safety and Permits as per Article 4, Section 4.8 of the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance regarding the determination that the site has not attained legal non-conforming status for a retractable canopy over the courtyard and the associated deficiency of open space.
Okay, just wish to read into the record the summary of the appeal. The appellant, or CZO, section 25.3.C.4. The appellant argues that because the canopy remains in place at all times, but is only extended or elongated, or otherwise in a closed position, during inclement weather, it is not a temporary or intermittent use. However, it is only when the canopy is closed that the open space ratio is violated. Because, as applicant admits the violation occurs only temporarily, it is not sufficient to attain non-conforming use status. In subsequent communications, counsel for the appellant has argued that state law requires granting a non-conformity where 2 conditions are met. The non-conforming condition has existed for more than 10 years, and 2, notice of a violation 2, which pertains to prescriptive periods to enforce zoning regimes. Violation thereof must be brought within 10 years. An earlier request for a variance resulted in a staff report which notices of violations dated May appears to be a legal non-conforming Department of Safety and Permits, but rather made by a staff member of the Board of Zoning Appeals, and therefore is not subject to review legal non-conforming footprint, because the proposed canopy would violate open space.
Miles Granson representing the applicant. Clearly presenting and restating the issue. This is an appeal of a determination that a retractable canopy space ratio aspects thereof. We understand that anytime a land use matter involves the French Quarter, there will be some added sensitivity. There presently is an existing canopy that is grandfathered as a legal non-conforming structure. The replacement canopy will not increase the non-conformity in either extent or frequency. Nothing that is being proposed will from functionality to aesthetics, while in no way expanding the non-conformity concern in any way. In fact, the DCC has approved this design in 2014. I think that's a key point. Again, the DCC has approved the detail. But first, I want to focus on the law, because ultimately that's the standard that we're here to review. And we should note that the state law establishes a 10-year prescriptive period on enforcing zoning violations, after which time they become legally grandfathered as non-conforming. It is clear that the non-conformity has existed for greater than 10 years as required by Louisiana Revised Statutes for Historic Districts. However, in determining that despite the state law that the canopy had not achieved non-conforming status as to the open space ratio, the then director wrote, while the zoning division acknowledges that a retractable canvas canopy has existed within the courtyard of this hotel for at least 10 years, and goes on to state that because it is no non-conforming use according to the report. They cite 25.3.C.4. Only one section, non-conforming use. The CZO is 100% clear, expressly and unambiguously, that the canopy and open space ratio do not constitute non-conforming use, but rather non-conforming structure. The CZO expressed in 1991. That all being said, I'm going to pass it now to the operator.
The next. Proceed to give your name and address for the record as well.
Okay, my name is Ryan Yeager. I'm address is 15, as well as the operations of this particular property. First of all, I want to thank the staff and board for hearing our finest properties in the French Quarter, with the courtyard being one of its greatest amenities. The courtyard space within the hotel, like I previously stated, is operational standpoint. The courtyard is utilized both for breakfast as well as events such as weddings, which the current canopy is really there to, I guess, under extreme weather conditions, to protect the courtyard. Some of the issues with the current canopy is the safety with the current canopy. It's not a easy canopy to open and or close. It's held together by I can't get the word out, cables, I'm sorry, that have broke on previous occasions. So an eyesore, really bring it up to the quality of this particular hotel and also create a more safe condition for our the courtyard a lot, and it's really not the intent of the ownership or the hotel to have this enclosure closed unless weather permit and or some other condition that you know, again, would require us to shut it. Really all I have to say, unless I have any questions.
Is there anyone else here in support of the applicant for
Members, Mike Sherman, on behalf of the applicant. I think everything's been said. I do want to point out just one feature. This is a good thing. This proposal, it's replacing an old ratty canopy with a beautiful new canopy. Extra expense has been incurred in the design to make sure when it's open, the amount of open space is identical. Extra expense was incurred to make sure of that. The issue really is the procedural path here today. It's VCC canopy, which has been up for decades and decades, attained non-conforming presented to them. We feel is clearly on our side here.
Good afternoon, BZA board.
Mike's not very sensitive. Thank you.
Good afternoon, BZA members. My name is Jack Greenwood, and I'm the executive assistant for Vucre's support of the decision of the Director of Safety and Permits regarding the proposed enclosure of at 7:30 p.m. Article 25 of the Zoning Code.
Thank you. Is anyone else here in opposition? The applicant has an opportunity to rebut.
That the canopy is to remain open, except in inclement weather. We don't want to keep it enclosed all the time. We want amenity for the property, right? Why would we want to enclose it? We want the courtyard to remain open, except in inclement weather, just like it.
Thank you. Any questions from the board?
Just as a point of clarification, we can't do any provisos as part of this motion. This would conditions. Okay, just want to check to see procedurally what we.
I just wanted some clarification on the distinction between use and quickly in the presentation. Is there, you know?
So a couple points, and if you
I'm
would,
asking you that question.
yeah, if you would let me go over a couple points, I think it'll holistically answer some of this. But generally speaking, one of the issues at hand is there's actually a compound question that was asked to this department, and a way to get the correct answer now is that a retractable, the actual wires and in an open position, a bunched up. When we talk about, now I'm going to go back into the question you asked. We have a canopy that is, by all accounts, left open a huge majority of the time. To refer to it as a non-conforming structure, that will imply some sort of ceiling, when it is clearly implied that it is open the majority of the time. Imagine somebody sets one of these at the front
setback on their property for a bar, and they open it every once in a while. And then now they want to take it off and they want to build hard space around it, okay? We're mixing and matching these two, and I think it's extremely important to remember that we do, I believe correctly, look at this thing as an intermittent use because it is a retractable canopy. I think everybody understands that. If we want to look at 3 wires and a piece of fabric canopy as an existing structure, I think we're perfectly fine to potentially even change our position on that. But there is no, and now we elevate this and turn this into a retractable glass steel structure, okay? We're trying to bridge the structure via the use, and I think it's important to break the two back down to their specific parts. Voluntary removal by 25.2G is specifically would negate any of the grandfathering that may or may not have taken place. The second, very strongly that the sections of 10.2B1 very clearly identify a process forward. Again, Mr. Writing already in the CZO on what a hotel needs to do in case they want to alter any of the open floor area, any of the open space requirements. As it relates generally, did that help illuminate your question, or you still have?
I was also just curious about the height change and the increase of volume.
So again,
It's permanent, but if it's not
if
permanent.
we're going to talk about 3 cables with a canopy that, by all accounts, is very rarely extended, I don't believe that we can talk about this being an actual structure in a roof. You know, we're now talking about anything that might open on a very, very small amount of times, now being a pathway forward to people to grandfather hard space and now increase your cubicle content.
Yeah,
This is a courtyard, and for it to be a courtyard, it needs to be an open space. And for the ability for us to say that we have to imagine it in its expanded, unretracted state, that's not what we're here to talk about. It's clearly that it's always it's primarily in a retracted state. There is no height issue here. No, you know, it's meant to be open space.
I guess my concern is that as it's now a permanent structure at that, but if it's a temporary structure, then it.
Again, I have no method to do that, but our department was basically to say that the existing one is grandfathered, and therefore this is a way to upgrade, to voluntarily upgrade to a.
So a quick question, and because I appreciate both sides of the coin on this conversation, but I think that's something that's very critical. And in the case of when we're dealing with a fabric system, there are certain components within the building code that dictate when it becomes a structure, and one of them is even material in the horizontal plane. And I'm getting extremely technical right now, but I think it's very critical to how we get into the determination of, is this really about structure versus use? And I'm going to give y'all a chance to rebut. Just let me finish the thought.
Please.
What my concern is when we talk about temporary systems, and while it wasn't necessarily part of an appeal question, I'm going to bring y'all back to a case that we had some time ago. I think it was Varetto in Washington, and we were talking about the temporary structure in the rear yard where they had a fabric system over the trellis, as opposed to him coming in and putting in an aluminum roof system. And what we did in that case was that we took the understanding that because it was a fabric system, it could be changed out with wear and tear. It doesn't meet, because in this case, what we're talking about is simply just that. We're talking about an existing fabric system which does not meet the uplift requirements of a horizontal plane for a roof plane. And theoretically, for it to become a structure, we would have to have some form of a structurally sound roof plane in this condition. So I'm just concerned that because of what we've done in the past, triggers the conversation that this does come actually return back to Mr. Smith's point of this being more about use versus structure. I know we're talking about process, but I want to make sure that we're clarifying the two. And I see you flipping around for definitions, so let's, Miles, I'm gonna let you go, and if Mr. Smith could rebut to that point.
Yeah, no, I think that's the $1 million point, and I'll let Mr. Grandison, I'll let Miles talk about the structure in a moment. I just want to keep us focused on the non-conformity that brings us here today, which is open space. That's why we want to be here today, is open space. That's what the appeal was based upon. That seems to be the easier issue to determine. When it gets to structure, when it gets to appropriateness, there are massive VCC issues. Fortunately, we've been approved by the VCC once. That's a really high bar. So when we get to the replacement on one floor to the other floor, we get into questions of historical appropriateness. The VCC has approved us there. We will go back to them again as necessary through a separate process. I don't want to let the VCC issues seep into zoning. The limited question we wanted to bring before this board is a nonconformity has been declared in writing by safety and permits as to something. The issue that brings us before you today is open space, and we're trying to bridge that nexus to resolve this before the BZA today so that we don't have the 5-month conditional use process on expansion. We don't want to expand it. We don't want to lose the courtyard. And if we were looking for the cheaper solution to actually expand the building, it would be probably 1/10 the price to put a roof over there through a conditional use. We don't want to do that. In fact, not only are we incurring the expense for a similar structure, we're actually incurring the expense of keeping the open space the same in the open position as well as the closed position. I'll let Miles talk about the definition of structure.
What we're here for. So one, we're here for open space, as Mr. Sherman mentioned. The other thing is, in terms of structure, there are going to be definitions for structure in International Building Code and other places, but the only definition of structure that matters to us here is the definition that's in the CZO. So that's the only definition that anything constructed or erected, the use of which more or less permanent location on the ground, or attached to something having a permanent location on the ground. And again, we already read the non-conforming structure definition, which is here on the board, which states that if it's an open space violation, then it is a non-conforming structure. So again, from a legal standpoint, and we'll read this definition again one more time for the non-conforming structure, which is as follows: non-conforming structure, a structure that fails to meet height and yard requirements. So it's clear that according to the definition in the CZO, this is a structure, whether it's thought of as one in International Building Code or somewhere else, but in the CZO, this is a structure. And it's also clear that open space violations fall under non-conforming structure and not non-conforming use. So we cannot apply the non-conforming use language, which is what was applied by the previous director in error. So we must apply non-conforming structure language, and the entire rationale for this not working is the non-conforming use language, which cannot apply.
Again, I think we have a. Again, when we have a question that comes around about a retractable thing, we're now mixing again the violation because we have a canopy that is consistently left open. So we're using words from two separate spots to make the other side work. At the end of the day, only one of it can either be one or the other, it cannot be both. So if there is going to be a decision in favor of the applicant, understandably, it needs to make sure that it uses holistically either the use provisions or the structure provisions, but not mixing and matching. Again, we have a three metal wires and a fabric canopy that is now going to be blessed potentially to call this thing a structure that will then imply that it has a.
Sorry, I would just like to add briefly to that and go back to, I'm Ashley Becknell, Chief Zoning Official. I would like to go back to 25.2G, which applies both to non-conforming uses and structures, specifies that the voluntary demolition of a non-conforming structure or use will result in the loss of the legal non-conforming status of that use. And when it has been voluntarily demolished, it may only be rebuilt in conformity with the ordinance. So by removing the fabric canopy, we are voluntarily demolishing it in this situation, and moving forward, it would have to be in conformity with the ordinance, whether it's a structure or a use.
So on that point, that kind of helps to only mimic, for those of you who've been in here since the beginning of the meeting when we got into some determinations earlier of nonconformity on earlier rulings. I know we're not dealing with zoning docket. I know this is appeal, but I think it's applicability of the zoning code. That, case in point, I mean, there was an earlier project, we denied it, and it was under the basis that once it was demolished, nonconformity is lost. The reason why I asked the question earlier about the definition between structure versus a or the definition of what is considered a structural element, I think only applies because it helps to delineate what becomes the open space area versus what isn't. And that's the only reason why I asked that question, because in the case of when it is the 3 chords in the fabric system, does that, I mean, apparently the open area requirements were met, but still, how does that part of the structure become defined? And I got it from what you guys presented. But
It's all a structure. It's one structure. It's
because it's connected to the
correct.
primary use. I get it.
It's just one structure. This is a minor amendment to one structure that the VCC has found historically appropriate once, and we hope they will do so a second time again. It's just the same structure. This is not a house where we're demolishing and rebuilding ground up. This is a historic complex of buildings that have been used as a hotel for many decades. And the open space, we are not seeking any change to the open space. The structure is not a fabric and 3 chords. The structure is the hotel. That's the structure we're talking about.
So I have
Not a component of the structure.
So something that I'm now just realizing, and when it was reviewed by VCC, understanding that date, that's one thing that's now thrown me off a little bit. We're talking about 2014, previous CZO versus current. And does that have any applicability in this case?
Not really. The requirement was the same under both zoning ordinances.
And I was initially asking thinking of that question only because in looking at the full docket, there was a point where a decision was made that changed because of the change in the CZO, and I think that was the earlier decision by Director Munster.
So the former CZO doesn't differentiate between a non-conforming use and a non-conforming structure. It was only after we had a case called Cordis decision, which is based on a case that happened on Newcomb Boulevard, that we actually used the methodology or the language that was in that case and forwarded, added that to the CZO. So as we get legal decisions along the way that tell us to distinguish between things, we do that in the CZO. So the only difference you're going to find is, one, the old ordinance only spoke to non-conforming use.
So you guys wanted to add?
Miles, do you have something to?
And Mr. Sherman might kick me under the table, but at risk of muddying the waters a little bit, I do want to just point out something here. We're here talking about the open space ratio and about the non-conforming termination, is that it's so intermittent and so temporary that it can't form a non-conforming use. Well then, if that's the case, again, if it is so intermittent and so temporary and so casual, which is the language from the code, that it cannot form that non-conforming use, well, if, again, wouldn't it also be so intermittent, so temporary, and so casual that it could also not form the basis for a violation of the code as to open space to begin with? And in which case this would be allowed, there would be no reason for us to be here, and this would be allowed for that purpose, and the only issue before us would be going to VCC and getting those approvals. So it would seem that either it's not a nonconformity to begin with because it's not a violation of open space, or it is, but it can't be one or the other depending on which one is adverse to our position at that moment.
Great point. The problem then comes in, once again, once it's reviewed for permit, is it then inherently reviewed as a structure or as something different? And I think that's when the bigger questions do come into play, as it's proposed, not necessarily as it previously functioned. So if Safety and Permits has any further clarity to that point, I want to give them a chance to
Sure.
rebut first, just to kind of balance.
Of course,
this, please,
at
Mike.
one potential path.
Okay.
So it's a great hypothetical and a hypothetical and a hypothetical. What I always try to bring it back down to again is we have a specific question where the applicant has tried to say that their canopy, their retractable canopy, has somehow been grandfathered in a way that is going to help lead to a future question
that is yet to actually be asked by a lack of a permit for a glass retractable canopy. We haven't specifically been asked that question, and we have not specifically answered that question. What I would say is we have a potential for a, again, we're just going down too many rabbit holes.
And so this would, when it gets into process of how some of us that operate in the regulatory world of advising clients, was it triggered by question, or was it triggered by permit application?
So the question at the end of the day, our basis on this has been that knowing the full, complete question, is that a glass structure is going to be now a structure that has not been there before. And we do believe it will have the absolute ability to be used at a much
Higher rate.
higher rate, thank you, than a lesser quality retractable structure. In fact, that was one of the reasons in the background of this that the applicant has expressed to us that they have issues in some of the rain because the way the rain actually flows on to guests, and also that in some sort of other conditions, it's a great feature to have covered, but it's not serving the purpose, and therefore a more permanent structure, a glass type structure, a steel structure that's built in, will definitely have the ability now to be closed on a much greater number of occasions, for events, for weather, for all sorts of things that might otherwise be perfectly, innocuous. It now is taking this intermittent thing and it's turning it into, we're using the appeal to get us to bless the ability.
And it's and that's why I asked that initial question of.
I wonder if
Hold on one second. Let me
apologies.
just get my thought out. What my concern is when we get into the function of that structural element, and understanding that if once it did have to then inherently come to safety and permits, there are, once again, why I said the question earlier, uplift requirements, other elements that come into play. And because of that, let's say in the case of a wind event or storm, you could theoretically leave this thing completely closed and for the closeout open, because that's a gray area of which way you want to describe it, protect the entire courtyard in the case of a serious event. In a case of if you had a fabric system covering the entire courtyard, in the case of a storm, that system will dismantle or unravel and not necessarily protect everything that's under it. So I hate to keep coming back to the structural question, but now understanding that it hadn't been applied for as a building permit to really go through those steps to trigger the real question, I think it only adds more ambiguity to where we are
And
right now.
can I add a little bit more
Yeah,
color
go
to
ahead.
that? I think some of the other things I'm having trouble with is all the other building upgrades that go along with this. So you've got, if I'm reading this right, there's additional sprinklering that's happening. Is that right?
Or is that even
this
tied
space?
to the system?
I don't believe we've considered.
I thought there was some sprinkler additions to this. And then also the space right now is sort of semi-conditioned. In the photographs I was looking at online, that there's like, looks like there's air conditioning, sort of ad hoc air conditioning in that space when it's closed. So I mean, it's an interesting, complicated, not simple question here, because there's a lot going on with the structure around it beyond just the little cables.
It's almost unfortunate inherently once you increase the performance of the system, it triggers a higher rate, theoretically.
A phase where there's almost a suspicion that we're trying to, the feature is just almost a gimmick to be able to open it when we can, but almost to we ever want to get rid of the courtyard. So we almost have to disprove a negative, which is how we can assure the BZA and safety and permits that by installing this expensive system, a couple ideas in the form of a deed restriction, and if the board, rather than making a difficult decision, would perhaps give us a 1-month deferral. I understand this has been deferred for a while. We would maybe like to make a proposal to safety and permits on a series of deed restrictions. And it almost sounds like there might be a different question. We are really here today before you on open space. I think for a number of reasons, the open space issue is in our favor, but even if that's resolved in our favor, it sounds like from Mr. Smith and Ms. Becknell's concerns, there could be other concerns that they would raise. And we'd like to resolve this once and for all. I do say, just to bring us back to where we started from, I don't want to lose perspective, and thank you both again. This is a good thing, right? We're really not trying to enclose the space. If we were trying to enclose the space permanently, we'd go apply for conditional use and go through that process and stand our own merits. We really are trying to replace, with this hotel, a rat bag old hotel with a beautiful hotel, which is what was done. Now a ratty old canopy with the new system to accomplish the same functionality. So I don't know that I have much more to offer except to say we'll accept a deed restriction. We'd love a chance to propose that.
Respond to that. So you actually you hit the point about my concern that, you know, even though this, as you said, is a good operator and all that, we're basically making an atrium now, right? Because by the time you satisfy the fire marshal requirements for this thing that's closed
Does have to be
position,
protected.
you've added sprinklers, you've got
And smoke
conditioning
evac.
there, you've got all kinds of stuff that makes this thing functional as a closed structure. Because you have to satisfy that to get it built. And so I think that's what my concern is.
Mhm.
And so there's another remedy to that.
Yeah.
I do think that there's something that I'd like to point out, and I think Mike touched on it briefly as well. We've been struggling with the process here a lot to try to figure out whether this is a legal nonconformity, and that's the path forward. But the CZO has a very clear path forward that addresses all of this. Section 10.2B1 directs this to a conditional use. A conditional use would be a way to air all of these concerns, have a review of the proposed canopy, which does appear in many ways to be an upgrade. It just does not appear to be a legal nonconformity that they are simply maintaining.
So, here's the best hypothetical. Let's assume there was no canopy at all, okay? And an applicant just decided to come and wanted to add in the same glass retractable canopy. Most likely, our determination is going to be that is going to constitute some sort of permanently enclosable thing. It's no longer going to be as temporary or intermittent. And at that point, we would absolutely direct them to the conditional use process specified in Chapter 10. And that is, again, getting down to the root of it, where there is a process to deal with the addition of a new canopy, and we believe it will be that. Again, we have no suspicions other than what we have to do with any applicant. I don't believe it has anything to do with the hotel operator, staff, anything like that. We're looking at a structure that has the ability to be much more permanent in nature, and that's generally going to be what our determination will be, based on this or any other similar application.
And I think to that point, and even the one speaker in opposition even gave a point of support to the operator and how they do function throughout the quarter. So I think the fact of just the spirit of debate of what we do have in front of us is only helping us to further clarify something in terms of how we need to handle this from a process in a bigger picture, right?
It just seems like from the law discussed today on the one issue that we're here before, it almost seems there was acknowledgement that our position on the open space issue before you today is the correct one, but that there are other issues. But the definition of structure is so clear. It uses the word anything attached. And the structure at issue here is not the canopy, it's the actual hotel structure. So I'm proposing this deferral voluntarily because I think on the issue before you today, I think we've made our case, and but rather than solving only part of an issue, Safety and Permits has expressed additional concerns unrelated to what's before you today, and maybe a month gives us a chance to resolve all those together.
Motion in order.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Just want to make sure, are there any other questions from the board? Okay, sorry.
My bad.
No worries. So, in regards to docket 5918, I'd like to make a motion to accept the applicant's request for deferral, so they can maybe work this out another way. and if not, we'll hear it again. 30 days, is that what we said? Yeah, 30?
Defer to the applicant and to the staff.
Yeah? Okay. So 30-day deferral.
Only thing is, I want to second that. The only thing I would still caution and present back to the applicant is to really investigate further with Safety and Permits, as well as staff, in terms of the trigger of when a building permit is actually applied for, and how does that impact how this is determined. I understand that there's two different processes, but apparently there's a bigger question in terms of when it should really be the question of if this is a structure or not. It does impact the answer.
With regard to BZA docket with regard to BZA docket 059-18, it's been moved by Commissioner Diaz, second by Commissioner James, to defer the matter 30 days at the applicant's request for further discussions and clarifications. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Next item.
Thank you.
We will now begin with the new business for appeals. Our next item is item number 14, BZA docket 09218, for property located at 1153 This is an appeal of a decision of the Director of Safety and Permits as per Article 4, Section 4.8 of the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance regarding the determination that the Department of Safety and Permits will do a conditional use permitting an indoor amusement facility with standard restaurant, bar, and live entertainment components as secondary uses as tied together by necessity. The property owner for the subject property filed an appeal of the Department of Safety and Permits decision that this application is timely. It was received past deadline for November hearing, so it will appear on the December docket. The Department of Safety and Permits position is that the BZA will have to defer consideration of docket 9218 until they have made a determination on the new application, since the ability to hear the first case relies on the outcome of the second. Therefore, staff is recommending deferral of this matter to the Monday, December 10th BZA hearing.
I don't know if, I know that the request is for a deferral, but I didn't know if the city had any comments to,
We don't have anything to add because there's been an appeal of the timeliness of the appeal. We believe it'd be in the best interest to hear them together at the subsequent meeting and would request a deferral.
Okay. Is the applicant present for the zoning docket? You could come up, please. Sorry, they just didn't have the number on the paperwork, sorry.
Hi. Excuse me, David Halpern, on behalf of Lower Magazine neighbors and Mr. and Mrs. Monahan. We have no objection to the deferral as requested or suggested, if you will, by the city attorney's office and staff.
Okay, let's just see if there are any public comments. Is there anyone here in support of the applicant for zoning docket 93-18? Anyone here in opposition? Are there any questions from the board?
Because it seems to be a lot of folks here, and I'm not sure if there was anybody else present. I know that we have the next docket item, but just next one, right? But just making sure if there's anybody else here to speak on it. Yeah. All right.
Is there a motion? And we were requesting a 30-day deferral, staff?
All right. Madam Chair, for motions in order.
Yes.
Madam Chair, regards to docket number
92, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
92-18 motions for 30-day deferral.
With regard to BZA docket 92-18, it's been moved by Commissioner James, second by Commissioner Malone, to defer the matter 30 days at the request of staff. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Next item.
Our next item is item number 15, BZA docket 09318, for a property located at 1000 Elmwood. This is an appeal of a decision of the Director of Safety and Permits as per Article 4, Section 4.8 of the Comprehensive Zoning Ordinance regarding building permit number 31052 RNBN, allowing for the installation of 34 solar panels on the chestnut side of the roof of 1000 Elmwood Street, contrary to the requirements set forth in Article 21, Section 21.6 of the UC.
Go ahead.
Hi. Just a summary of the appeal for the record for 1000 Eleanor. Permit was filed on September 19th, 2018 on behalf of the owners of 1000 Eleanor to install 34 solar panels on their roof. That the permit was issued in error since the permit applicant failed to comply with the requirements of CZO 21.6.DD, namely that the panel .1.c, and that the panels were not placed to avoid directing glare onto nearby properties or roadways pursuant to 21.6 DD 1B. The department issued a stop work order on permit number 18-31052
RNVN until such time as the agreement could be provided. The required interconnection agreement was provided to the department by Carla Sayer on October 29th, 2018. At that time, the director lifted the stop work order. It is the position of the department that the permit does not violate CZO section 21.6DD. Placement of the panels on the southern exposure of the home complies with the requirements of 21.6DD2B. That provision specifies that placing solar panels on a roof is permitted when that exposure is the most viable location, especially in the case of a southern exposure. That provision does require that the panels be integrated into the structure as an architectural feature. It specifically limits that inquiry to whether the panels meet the requirements of CZO 21.6.dd.2.d, which states solar panels may project from a building facade as follows, may project up to 2 feet from the facade, or they may encroach into required side yard or rear yard, but no closer than 5 feet to the rear or side property lines. The panels in question are in compliance with 22.6.dd.2.d. While the CZO does require an interconnection agreement, such agreement has since been provided by the permit applicant. The permit applicant has met all CZO requirements and therefore the permit is valid.
Thank you. The applicant can proceed. If you could give your name and address for the record.
Sure, Justin Schmidt,
You may need to speak a little. I know these mics are a little different than our usual.
Justin Schmidt, 909 Poydras Street, Suite 1500 for the applicants, Joseph and Mary Looney. We have a limited amount of time with a whole, I want to really focus your attention to really 2 paragraphs or 2 provisions in the CZO. Before that, just to, as the recap that Director Smith just mentioned, those are the salient dates, with the exception I'd like to add that on November 2nd, 2018, we spoke for about 45 minutes and I got further clarity with respect to Director Smith's position and how he got there. That telephone call was precipitated by an email on October 29th from Director Smith indicating that they were lifting the stop work order that had been in place for really a month. Between the issuance of the stop work order on the 25th of September and October 29th, there wasn't any communication from Director Smith's office with respect to this appeal. I'll also note that the LAMA section available to the public is woefully deficient of reasons why the stop work order was issued in the first place, and did not designate at the time that it was merely on the fact that there wasn't an interconnection agreement submitted. We had several other things in our application and that we had provided Director Smith with, all of which were reasons to issue the stop work order. So in the conversation that I had with Director Smith on the 2nd, it seemed that this really broke down into these 2 provisions, which are 21.6DD.1, which are the general requirements of solar panels, and then 21.6.DD.2, which is the mounting of the systems. Without agreeing with Director Smith with respect to his interpretation of 21.6.DD.1b, that these solar panels proposed will not place concentration solar radiation or glare directed toward neighboring properties or the roadways, I want to focus on the language that really we find, even notwithstanding any of Director Smith's arguments, to be most objectionable, and that is 21.6.DD.2b, the last sentence. It says, in those instances, meaning instances where solar panels have to be seen from the roadway, in those instances, solar panels shall be integrated into the structure as an architectural feature as described in paragraph D below. Architectural feature is a defined term in our CZO. An architectural feature in our CZO is defined as a portion or projection from a structure that contributes to the aesthetics, excluding signs, that is not necessary for the structural integrity of the structure or to make the structure habitable. So a roof in and of itself is not an aesthetic feature because it is necessary both to make it habitable. You can't have a house without a roof on it. And I would imagine, although I defer to the architects, that a roof supplies some sort of structural integrity to the house itself. So I think if we could agree that an architectural feature, so then we're left with whether or not Director Smith was correct in dismissing our claim that the solar panels had to be integrated into an architectural feature. In that discussion, aesthetics is not defined in our zoning ordinance. It is our zoning ordinance says that when we have a word, we use the common term, or we go to the dictionary, and the dictionary describes aesthetics as an adjective concerned with the beauty or the appreciation of beauty, and as a noun, a set of principles underlying and guiding the work of a particular artist or artist movement. So we know that aesthetics is dealing with beauty. With that respect,
That was the end of your time, Justin.
Okay. Joe, you want to go ahead and I'll finish up on a rebuttal thing.
Okay, thank you. Can you give your name and address, sir?
My name is Joseph Looney. I'm one of the applicants here, along with my wife, Mary. My address.
So you're speaking a little closer, sorry. It's a little.
My address.
Proceed with your comment.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all the members of the board for coming today. The paragraph we're talking about in the ordinances is intended. Let's look at the intent. The intent is to discourage solar panels from being visible on the street, from the street. That's the intent. The exception, which the permit was granted on by Director Smith, is also intended to discourage panels from being visible from the street. The owners, in this case, do not meet that exception. The panels will be fully visible from the street. The ordinance prohibits that. The owner's position is that you can put panels on the roof without any architectural features on the south side visible from the street. Pure and simple. That vitiates the ordinance. And with all due respect to the director, which I think I'm entitled to do because I practiced law in New Orleans for 40 years, retired last year. Over that time, not everything I did, but over that time, I dealt with statutory construction, I dealt with regulatory interpretation, I dealt with ordinances. I've handled cases in the federal courts about zoning ordinances and substantive due process violations. I can tell you that what the director has done in this case is to nullify the ordinance based upon my experience, and that's in all honesty. He has read the requirement out that says they cannot be placed in a position visible from the street unless they're integrated as an architectural feature. By reading that out, by not requiring an architectural feature in this case, he doesn't require anything. It violates the main part of the ordinance. I have one last thing to say. And this relates to what I read in the owner's attorney's letter, point they're raising. But analysis of economic viability always is done in relation to energy needs. And there's nothing in the McGraby numbers, and there's nothing in what the attorney says that even discuss the energy needs of this property at 1000 Eleanor. We urge the board to take into account the particular energy need as the measure here of viability, economic viability. And we ask the court to consider that a principal energy policy is conservation. In other words, the aim of our policies is to meet needs, not to supply a bunch of excess. We calculated the real quantifiable amount of energy this property, permitted property, will need. And based upon our utility bills of the last 12 months, we're 50 feet away. Adjusted for the size, they're a smaller one-story house, we're a two-story house. The result of what they're going to need, quantifiable, real numbers, is 10,611 kilowatt hours per year. Their system, according to their letter, will produce far in excess of that, 13,537 kilowatts. We looked into their numbers, and this is what I found. Bear with me real quickly, 30 seconds. The $13,357 number is what would result using a formula of solar power that's provided by the industry and can be found at www.solar-basics-how-much-a-solar-a-panel-produce. Okay? So it's kind of a formula that the industry has come up with. But one component of it is clearly off base when you consider solar in our area. The formula assumes 4 hours of usable sun a day. According to U.S. climate data,
Keep going down this step. Our discussion has nothing to do with the output or the hours. It's strictly on the placement of the panels. So I just want to make sure that you'll limit me instead of taking up your time discussing an issue that's not before us.
okay, well, if then, I'm just relating to what's in the owner's attorney's letter, so if they're not going to address it, I'm fine with not addressing it.
I mean, I'll make sure that our only issue is the placement of the panels. Any discussion on usage or any of those points are not properly before us. We're only addressing the placement.
Okay, this really, and thank you for pointing that out, this really goes to viability too. Their argument is that it's more viable on the south side. So all I'm pointing out here is that 7.5 hours of sunlight in New Orleans is nearly twice the hours of sun the McGraw-Hill numbers appear to consider in their letter, more than almost twice. If you use the New Orleans numbers, which are the real numbers, the kilowatt hours generated even on the non-street side should be increased 87%. That would yield 14,936 watts. My time is
That
up?
was the end of your time, yes.
Okay. If
Is
I
there
could
anyone else here, if you're in objection or not? Is there anyone else here in support of?
My name is Mary Looney. Can you hear me?
Yes, just
I
make
live-
sure you're speaking close enough in.
Time starts that you all low roof will do and ruins the view from the two most important rooms in my house, my living room and my bedroom. I think the value of my house will be greatly diminished. And it doesn't affect just my house. We're talking about 3 houses. The 2 families next to me face the exact same situation. If you look at page 5, the house at 5906 Chestnut Street is straight across from the proposed panels. And the people that just bought at 5912 Chestnut bought a little cottage for a lot of money that was not across the street from a big black roof. There's also in your papers a letter from the Upper Hurstville Neighborhood Association. Our entire neighborhood association has stuck its neck out in overwhelming opinion that these solar panels, the placement of them, not the solar panels, the placement of them is inappropriate to the area, does not follow city guidelines, and in their words, quote, negatively impacts multiple adjacent neighbors. Comprehensive zoning rules were written. And the circumstances we face...
That was the end of your time, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can you just look at the rest of the photos?
We have everything in our, what we have in our package.
Thank you
Is
so
there
much.
anyone else here in support of docket 093-18? You can come up.
Good afternoon. I'm Amy Dixon Kalinowski, and I'm here representing my husband and I. We're at 59 The Country on business. We second everything that the Loonies have said. These solar panels directly face our house. We live in a house that's over 100 years old. We had a gorgeous magnolia tree for many, many years that was ancient in and of itself. It was horribly damaged due to Katrina and electric lightning strikes, and so we had to take it down so it didn't have another tree up to block the view of this. This glare will be directly on our house. Our neighborhood is lovely and beautiful. This is not, but they could easily be on the other side of the roof where nobody would view them. And the sun does go from east to west in our neighborhood. and it would receive a great deal of energy from those solar panels. Thank you for your time.
Anyone here in opposition? If you can come up, please.
My name is Vincent Booth. I reside at 3330 Grand Route, St. John, New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm an attorney. I represent the property owner, Ms. Carla Seiler. In addition to Ms. Seiler, I have here today with me the solar contractor, Mr. McRobbie from Bayou Solar, the architect, Mr. Ginther, and a representative of a solar lobbying agency, Mr. Canton. I'll briefly address the issues that have been raised by the applicants. With regard to the statement of intent, Mr. Looney and his counsel said that the law says that there's an intent to prevent solar panels from being seen from the street. That is not what the law says. Y'all can read it, but there are provisions that says pitch roof mounted solar panels should be placed in a location least visible. That's not a statement of intent that they should not be seen from the street. The question is whether excessive glare is being shown onto a roadway or a property. I submitted to you the affidavit of Mr. McRobbie as well as the solar glare studies that he performed and the generation studies. He's here to answer more questions, but basically the panels on the north-facing slope are not economically viable. Mr. Canton can address that as well as far as how much production you have to have in order to be eligible for federal tax credits, for instance. On the north-facing slope, they simply will not generate enough power. To say, oh, we see big back panels from our house, well, if you go to your front living room window, they don't show pictures from the inside of the house, and pull back your curtains in the Looney's house, yes, you can look across the street and you'll now see solar panels that are doing something to combat what's probably the worst scourge to ever face the human race, which is solar global warming, and these solar panels intended to alleviate that. The statement we should only be concerned about the historic nature of our properties and the architectural features. I think we need to think about whether the city of New Orleans is going to continue to be here in 50 years if we do panels on the southern facing roof.
Yeah, I concur with everything you said, but that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Anyone else here in opposition to docket 093-18? The applicant has an opportunity to rebut.
Yes, we still have. Okay. Is erroneous. We are investing in this property. We intend to live there. The solar panels themselves, in terms of that, will stay on the roof. If you have seen the pictures that we provided, the rendering by our architect, you can see that it blends with the roof. It's not something that's a foot off the roof or anything else. It's within compliance, and we believe it is not unattractive. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Is anyone else here in opposition?
Jeff Canton, Gulf States Renewable Energy. We represent solar firms and solar consumers in Louisiana and Mississippi. I do want to say a couple quick things. There have been some ideas about how much energy the system will generate relative to the facility's energy usage, and the system was designed to generate right at about what the facility is expected to use. There is no anticipation of overgeneration. We should remember that there are thousands of solar systems around New Orleans, and every one follows whatever code is applicable in its area. When we're in an HTLC compliant area, those systems are compliant to that location. In this location, I think the owner and contractor went above and beyond what they were required to do to actually make the installation appear more architecturally compliant to the building itself. So they have gone above what they were required to do. Put up by the National Renewable Energy Laboratories and the U.S. Department of Energy on the idea of solar and glare. I'll quote, "A common misconception about solar photovoltaic panels is that they inherently cause or create too much glare, posing a nuisance to neighbors and a safety risk for pilots, while in certain situations the glass surfaces of solar PV can produce glint, a momentary flash of bright radiation, and convert it to electricity. Solar panels are constructed of dark-colored materials and are covered with anti-reflective coatings. Modern panels reflect as little as 2% of incoming light, about the same as water, and less than soil or even wood shingles. Some of the concern and misconception is likely due to the confusion between solar PV and concentrating solar power. which typically use an array of mirrors to reflect sunlight. So I think it's very proven that solar is not a source of glare. It is something that, obviously the idea is usually a lot worse than the reality of it. So although I appreciate the concern of the folks that have brought the complaint, I believe that in reality will prove a lot less of a concern. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here in opposition to docket 093-18? The applicant has an opportunity to rebut.
All right, thank you. I'd like to first address some of the statements that Mr. Booth made, and I think then we'll go back to the original. First of all, and he might have said this inadvertently and slipped, we now hear that not only is there a impetus to put these solar panels on there for energy purposes, but now we're talking about tax credits. That would be additional monies going to the owner at the cost of the neighborhood. What's most problematic, though, is this statement about that the loonies felt that these panels are going to be looking at them with a scourge, and that if New Orleans was going to be viable in the future, we all have to have solar panels. This was similar to, although it was not filled with as much rhetoric as, or had a lot more rhetoric than the statement that I got into with Director Smith on the second, was there seems to be, well, quite frankly, and you can ask him, Director Smith came out and said, the city has made a volitional decision to encourage the use of solar panels. And for that matter, anything else that's economically, environmentally friendly and helps with our environment and the whole carbon footprint and so forth. I'm sure I butchered that, so he can, but that was the sentiment that was given, was that I got a feeling, and whether or not this might be pushing it to me, that a desire of the city, that he could take a blue pencil and start going after our zoning ordinance to make it work if the ends justify the means argument. It's the ends being more efficiency and better earth, green, carbon footprint, and the means meaning let's go ahead and go outside of what the black letter law of the zoning ordinance says, and we're going to write around it. So that was an argument that was made, but that dovetails into a couple of concepts that came up. First of all, in doing this, there's a very limited amount we can give you, but I will tell you, because this is important, if you look at all the solar information that's out there in the industry, one of the interesting things about it is we ran across a provision that said, this is the solar panel industry saying this, do not allow this language to be incorporated into your zoning ordinance. This is an unformulated language of the zoning ordinance. You know what? We have adopted that language verbatim. That the industry is saying, do not use this. That tells you that the industry saying this is not favorable to language, and it goes back to our point that this is not favorable, and Director Smith's blue penciling of the argument is not something that he can kind of get around for the sake of the environment. Director Smith also suggested that there were no products on the market that would facilitate incorporating these panels into an architectural feature. Well, we see in the zoning ordinance, there's a picture that there are actually tiles that have roofing shingles that have solar panels in them. Now, albeit more expensive than just putting up a 34 by 17 or whatever the size of these panels are on the roof, they can use solar shingles and still collect the feel-good environmental aspect, friendly environmental aspect of solar power. Now, the fact that they're expensive, as we know, when our zoning ordinance already looks at the 9 criterion, and we look at sections 4.6.F7, and we know that financial hardship should not be a reason for a variance. While we're not asking for a variance here or opposing a variance here, the concept that financial matters shouldn't be addressed when looking at these zoning ordinance or considering provisions holds true just as it does in the variance, which I do kind of throw out there. So why, instead of Director Smith bending an interpretation, does he not say, you go get a variance for these if you want to put them on the roof? You know, that would be the other alternative is, hey, applicant, owner, I'm going to read this like it says. If you think you can't make it work under these, go apply for a variance and go get it there. But I want to go back and highlight the language. And the only thing we in those instances, okay, solar panels shall be integrated into the structure.
And I just wanted to, I guess, before we, I didn't know if anybody else had any questions, but okay, I just had a quick, just to kind of clarify, because I just to be clear in light of some of the comments that council has suggested, that the what's at issue is whether or not what the applicant has, not the applicant, but what the homeowner has used meets the standard of what the law states. You've met the requirements of the law. And the only time that a variance would be required is if for some reason you're not meeting the letter of the law and you're requesting a variance to deviate from that. So in this situation, the position of the, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just to make sure that I'm clear, the position of the department is that the standard has been met. Therefore, there wasn't a need to request a variance. So that's why that position wasn't taken. Am I correct?
Yes, and I'll be happy to explain.
Shoot.
So for a couple of points, and I can only speak to the job in which I am tasked by the city charter to do, I am actually the interpreter of the zoning ordinance.
That was one question I
And
had.
that is something that constantly comes up as people like to throw out dictionary terms or their experience for decades in functions is very clear. I am the determining factor. Out of a blue pencil, mind you, it sometimes turns into actually an interpretation, which his law firm regularly asks for our interpretation. So again, seasoned veterans as himself know that this is a commonality of the office. When we get down to it, I can go point by point on some things. I'm going to try and spare that, as I know it's a lengthy meeting. But when it comes down to, a couple times, contributes to the aesthetics. So who gets to decide what contributes to the aesthetics? Is it the neighbor? Is it the homeowner? No, it's me.
And that was going to be my very question, was who makes the determination?
I am, and I also have the ability of a background and a license by the state of Louisiana as a licensed architect. So who more qualified than the person who's not only a registered architect in the state of Louisiana, but also the director of the Department of Safety and Permits. As it relates to some of the intent with it, we get down into background. Absolutely, we are here to look at these things. We are a resilient city. We absolutely have a directive from policy to encourage resiliency. It is black and white in the letter that we actually allow these. If the city of New Orleans did not want to allow solar panels, we would not have the language right here, so clearly vague, right? When it comes down to specifically 21.6 double D.2, letter B, which is the largest of the deals. Again, I've already explained that I absolutely should have and will include solar panels that are done delicately and gracefully. And again, only on the southern exposure where it's absolutely the most viable. But when we get to on pitched roof buildings, the maximum height of a solar panel may rise 18 inches. Clearly B, it's probably the clearest part of 21.6 can be raised. As I understand it, I think the solar panels in question come off about 4 inches. So instead of going to a maximum of 18 inches, which, again, there's clear heights here, not into terms that can be, again, blue penciled by myself, but we actually start having legitimate numbers, and the applicant is met or and actually been below that. Again, I think there's special consideration that's been taken. As it relates to neighbors' complaints, again, we lack a magic ball in the department to figure out which neighbor may or may not like something that gets built next to them legally. We also don't know which neighbors may find things offensive or otherwise. As it relates to the own testimony of some of those for this appeal, but of course against the solar panels, they've specified that, hey, if they put them on the other side, they'd be perfectly fine with it. As long as somebody else gets to look at it, it's perfectly fine. I think that that's an inappropriate response. And Again, as to the black letter of the law, Mr. Schmidt noted that a variance could otherwise be required. It is absolutely our position that a variance is not required, as they absolutely meet the black letter of the law.
I think those kind of address the questions that I had. The next question I was going to ask was just in terms of what some of the points from the applicant in terms of making the determination when there is a violation of the language of the law, and that was a direct responsibility of the director of the department.
So I just wanted to clarify something about B. The intent is for them to be on the roof, ideally, and then if you wanted to add more, you could put them as awnings on the facade, right?
Yes, that's how we understand it.
I mean, or if there's not enough roof, or it's a mansard roof or something, you could do that. But ideally, you do the panels in such a way that it's respectful of the architecture. And the example given is for what condition where they didn't maybe fit on the roof, or you want to do more than what's fitting on the roof. Correct?
Correct. You try your best, but again, these things are absolutely permitted on a roof. I think it's crystal clear on that point. If you wanted to do some sort of freestanding structure in your rear yard, we're going to have additional language that speaks to those instances.
Right. But the intent is that you can mount solar panels on the south-facing side of the roof or the facade if it meets what you guys have put.
Paragraph B, up to 18 inches. Up to 18 inches.
Which implies that you could even tune them to be at a different angle than the roof, right? I think that's the intent there, is that, so you can have clean out underneath the roof, but also you can pitch them so that they get a better solar angle.
As someone with a better than a basic understanding of how solar works, it absolutely is there for the flexibility, as roofs aren't just magically made to be at the best angle to catch the sun. And as it was mentioned by one of the solar reps, again, solar panels do not work if they reflect sun, because they are then inefficient by design.
And just to clarify one more time, because I'm not seeing it in the drawings, but they're going to be flat on the roof, right? They're not pitching these things up, and it's just like following the roof up.
They're slanted.
They're slanted.
Mhm.
I didn't see
I
that.
appreciate all of your qualifications in making all of these decisions. I do also understand the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Half of a roof being treated differently from the other half, for me, would not be aesthetically pleasing. I am also concerned about section 21.6.dd.1. Solar panels shall be placed so that concentrated solar radiation or glare. Glare is mentioned in here, so there must be a glare if it's mentioned in here. It's not to be directed on the properties or road of the neighbors. I actually drove by this when I was doing my homework. I got in my car and I drove by this. The house in question on Eleanor Street is a one-story house, and the Looney's property is across the space, Chestnut. I could see the brackets for those solar panels a block. I do not think that is aesthetically pleasing, and I appreciate the energy efficiency of solar panels and your desire to be modern in that approach, but that privilege does not extend to but also becoming a detriment for someone else. It has to work for everybody. So I am very concerned about allowing these solar panels to stay up there, because to me, it does not meet these two requirements. It is detrimental to the neighbors, as testified by the neighbors. Now, that's their feeling, and someone else may feel differently, but they have testified to that effect. And it says it shall be integrated into the structure as an architectural feature. They're just plopped on the side of one half of the roof. They're just stuck up there on one half of the roof. Is there any way these solar panels can be moved to produce the energy that the house owner wants and still be not a detriment to the neighbors? Is there any way that it can be worked out so that it can be satisfied both needs? Because right now it doesn't seem to be doing that.
And just a quick clarification, because I just want to make sure, and I think that was the part of the issue that one of the speakers made. It's not a question of visibility of the actual panels. It's a question of the glare. So you will see pieces, you will see the panels regardless of where they're located. So it's not a question of the visibility. It's a question, well, it's the question of the glare, and especially if there's a one-story structure versus a two-story. The visibility is always going to exist. It's a question of the glare. So I just want to make sure when making that determination, and I think the director mentioned, regardless of where you place them, there's going to be a group of homeowners that will object for these very same reasons. So even if they're in another part of the roof, there's going to be a different group of homeowners that could potentially have the same argument. So there's always going to be that potential. So it's more about a question of the glare, and as the director mentioned, that question is addressed by the director as opposed to that's interpreted by the director as opposed to the homeowner.
And actually, I just want to add something. No matter where you end up placing the panels on this structure, the second you take it away from the southern facing plane, you actually have to then increase the number of panels in order to increase the wattage that is required, kilowatt hours that are produced from the panels as installed. So one thing that's no questions. This is actually something that I will take respect to the professional of record, as I do take much respect to the fellow principals that I have within my firm. When we do study this and work with solar providers, when we do take into account installed in a certain orientation due to their ability to absorb and produce the power that's required. The second you put this on a north-facing plane, and I know that's not really the question here, once you get into the question of putting on a north-facing plane, you then almost, I won't get into the quantitative number of how many panels you have to increase it by, but there is some increased number. By going to the southern-facing plane, you reduce the amount that is actually required to be installed. Getting back to the point of what it speaks to in the CZO, 21.6 on B. When they talk about the provision of the 18 inches of how far it can be applied vertically, that is taking into account the fact that every roof pitch is not created equal. In some historic districts, you may have a certain pitch. You may have other parts of town where it's a flat roof. The reason why you have that 18-inch provision is in order to allow that panel to sit at the correct pitched angle in order for it to absorb light off that southern exposure. Just applying it to the east and west is not apples and oranges. It is not the same applicability. When we get down to the basis of how the code talks about glare, there's an advantage point of where glare is going to get presented to someone. Someone is going to see some point of glare for some short element of time, and that's how solar panels exist. I mean, I'm going to kind of step back from that point, sorry, before I get too deep.
Mr. James.
Please proceed, Mr. Smith.
I would actually say at this point, there's only been evidence supplied to our office by the solar glare. Again, the way panels are designed, it's there. You make an interesting note that if these panels were to be on a different surface, they would actually have to be at an extremely different angle than the actual roof, at which point the architectural ensemble of that roof would be dramatically altered.
Impacted.
Whereas
you would be then, and to cut you off, sorry, but yes, the second it's placed on the north-facing side of the roof, assuming that it follows the same pitch, that panel then has to be raked completely back the opposite direction, which then inherently does not respect the architectural integrity of the roof system as it's been designed for that primary structure. That's why it's also applied to the southern face of the building as well, so that that rake is not further exacerbated.
Is that an option? Solar shingles, is that an option?
At this point, I'm unprepared to answer that as it relates to the specific installation that has been designed. We believe that they meet the criteria prescribed in 21.6.
Yeah. I mean, the issue at hand here is, by right, can these people put solar panels on their roof?
Yes.
Right? It's not what the material of the solar panel is, what the technology is. You know, the efficiency, the type of panels are changing every year. And, you know, next year they might be, huh? Yeah, and
these requirements. In my opinion, they have not met these requirements.
Are there any other questions from the board? Is there a motion?
So in regards to docket, docket 09318, my motion is to uphold the Director of Safety and Permits' determination that this is, what am I even doing? That there's not an error. Yes, thank you.
Second.
With regard to docket 093-18, it's been moved by Commissioner Diaz, second by Commissioner James, to uphold the decision of the Director of the Department of Safety and Permits, finding that there is not an error in that decision. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Any abstentions? Note the one opposition and the motion carries. Next item.
We have the calendars.
At this time, would the board consider a motion to adopt the 2019 and 2020 Board of Zoning Adjustments meeting schedules?
Second.
It has been moved by Commissioner Gonzalez, second by Commissioner James, to adopt the BZA scheduling and deadlines for calendar year 2019 and calendar year 2020. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Any abstentions? And the motion carries. Next
Thank you.
item.
Would the board consider a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I'm sure they will. It's been moved by Commissioner Malone, second by Commissioner Diaz, to adjourn our meeting. All in favor, raise your hand. Any opposition? Any abstentions?